So 7 of the 40 stratagems from Codex Necrons were previewed yesterday. Let's take a look at what we have. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we've been covering all the news from Codex Space Marines and Necrons as it's come out. In today's video we're going to talk through the 7 previewed stratagems from Warhammer community yesterday, and briefly touch on what we know about Cryptek Arcana at the end of the video. Without further ado, let's jump straight into it. So first of all, we know that there's 40 stratagems in the new Necron Codex now. That's up a bit from previously. There were 27 before, I believe. It'll be interesting to see if they tweak or modify any of the old ones, but out of the ones that they've shown off, at least 6 of them are new. Games Workshop appear to have been splitting them into different categories now, which is probably going to be something that's going to be happening with each codex. Though at the moment I'm a little bit confused as to the different categories. I can see it being potentially useful to split off any ones that are done before the battle compared with the rest. It could be good to have them all in one handy place. The other categories they've had are strategic plays, war gear stratagems, battle tactics stratagems, and epic deed stratagems. To be honest, just from the wording from them, they all seem fairly similar to me. Maybe epic deeds are more focused on characters, but the others all seem to be happening in all sorts of different phases, and at this stage I'm not entirely certain how they're differentiating one from another. In any case, let's go through them and talk through how strong they look. First up we have Techno-Oracular Targeting, which you use before making a wound roll for a Necron unit, and basically the attack automatically wounds. As they say on the website, could be useful for a low strength high damage attack, such as a Necron Wraith's transdimensional beamer, which does look like it'd be quite high yield, as you'd have a relatively low chance of wounding against tough targets. I think this one could be most useful if you absolutely need that shots to kill that model. If you can give your unit a very high chance of finishing off an enemy model, for example, then it could be handy that you don't have to commit any more firepower to it, and maybe waste something big like a Doomsday Arc trying to shot down that last target. I think it's not looking incredibly high yield as a damage stratagem though. For the big high strength, high damage weapons that you'd want to use it on most, they've got a pretty decent chance of rolling to wound successfully anyway, and even if they fail, you might just be able to command reroll it. I think for most things that are wounding on 3s and a high damage, I'd just see if I make the roll and think about command rerolling it after. You might well save yourself the command point, or just get the exact same outcome anyway. I guess it could be useful if you've already used your command reroll though. I don't think I'd be making too much use of this one myself. Next up we have the Deathless Arise, which is a pretty interesting one as it poses the question what are rites of reanimation on the Technomancer. Technomancers are their new wording for the standard Crypteks as opposed to the Chronomancers or Psychomancers that we've already seen. But in any case this will allow you to use their rites of reanimation ability twice in that phase. It could just be the standard +1 to reanimation protocols as we've seen on the Crypteks at the moment, but I really hope it could be something fun like allowing to trigger reanimation protocols an additional time. It would be nice to have a mechanic to try and see Necrons get back up from the dead, even after they've failed that initial reanimation protocol roll. There's a bit of a hint that it might be something different, just +1 to their rolls. As the free text besides the stratagem says, play this when your reanimation protocols haven't been successful as you would have liked. Just when your opponent thinks they have an advantage, your dead Necrons return to the fray. So we're going to have to wait and see, but it does sound potentially fun. Next up we have Hand of the Pharaon, which is an upgrade for Necron Overlords that happens pre-game. It's a bit pricier at 2 command points rather than 1, and it'll basically allow the Overlord to use My Will Be Done twice per command phase rather than once. The model also gains the Pharaon keyword, although it's not clear exactly what that'll mean yet. With the new core rules coming in, I suspect that My Will Be Done will only be limited to core units rather than things like big vehicles and everything. But still, it looks like it could be a potentially useful one if you just want one Overlord to march up the board alongside a few big phalanxes of warriors or immortals perhaps. Being able to have the entire lot hit on 2s could be really useful. On slower moving more melee units, and it could be pretty handy for having +1 to charge as well. I do find it interesting that the Space Marine Chapter Master has gone to cost points rather than being a command point upgrade, but this one remains command points. A little bit of weirdness in game design going on between factions there. Next up we have Self-Destruction, which is one that we already have for Cryptek Scarabs. This one's pretty much the same, basically you kill a Scarab Swarm base to get some mortal wounds in combat. It's slightly buffed compared with the previous rule. Now if you roll a 2+ then you get D3 mortal wounds, but if you roll a 6 then you get a full 3. Highly situational I think. I'd say it's most use if say your Scarabs get tied up by a character with 1 or 2 wounds left. This could be a pretty fun way to just casually off them. Next we have one for the new Ophydian destroyers, which is Borrowing Nightmares. This one's 1 command point, and you basically get to redeploy the unit. Unfortunately, it will come at the price of having a turn off the board though. You only set them up as if they were coming in from Deep Strike, in the reinforcement step at the end of your next movement phase, not the same one. I think it could be most useful if you have a unit of these destroyers that have jumped in, killed an important enemy threat, and then found themselves out of position with charging anyone else. Potentially handy, particularly as they say it could be useful to put them back into kind of strategic reserve if you're trying to snag some late game objectives. In general again though, probably not one I'd plan on using, but could get a bit more use out of these whip-coiled menaces if they do find themselves out of position. Next we have a Tesla one called Malevolent Arcing. This one's 1 command point, and you use it after you've fired a Necron Tesla weapon against an enemy unit. After the weapon's resolved its attacks, you roll 1d6 for each other unit within 6 inches of that unit, and on a 4+, each unit takes a mortal wound. Honestly, this one's okay, but not spectacular. I think really to have any sort of decent mortal wound output from this, you're going to want to have a lot of enemy units castled up next to each other, so you can get a lot of rolls of 4+. Maybe could be worth it if you target a big horde unit that happens to be within 6 inches of a large part of the rest of the opponent's army, maybe just soften them up slightly with some random mortal wounds here and there, but it's hard to see this having any massive impact on the game. Usually just losing a single wound of a unit isn't actually going to change the opponent's battle plan much. I guess it could be most valuable if your opponent has a character on 1 wound left in the middle of their army. It could be a handy way to try and kill them after some death marks have softened them up a bit perhaps. Or maybe if your opponent has multiple very valuable 1 wound infantry about, perhaps things like Orc Tank Busters or Eldar Dark Reapers, something with a very high points cost per wound. Finally we have Empiric Damping, which is 1 command point, and this is the new unique stratagem for the Zarrican dynasty. They're already somewhat resistant to psychic spells by having the 5+ Feel No Pain against mortal wounds, and this kind of doubles down on their Blackstone effects of negating psychers by giving them a chance to deny psychic powers. You use it when a psyker manifests a psychic power within 18 inches of your units, and on a 4+, that psychic power is denied. This one's a little bit lower ranged than some armies' similar stratagems. For example, Sisters of Battle being able to use this at 24-inch range is pretty powerful, and it did used to be a bit more powerful once you could re-roll that dice with a command point as well, where now of course you can't. Still though, some psychic powers can be absolutely devastating, things like Warp Time for Chaos Space Marines, or maybe Null Zone if it's trying to negate the invul saves of some Wraiths. Having a 50-50 chance of making that power just disappear is no bad thing to have in your back pocket. Again, a situational but useful buff to the Zarrican dynasty. Overall from the previewed stratagems, I don't think there's anything that's absolutely outstandingly strong. I have the biggest hope for that Deathless Arise stratagem, obviously depending on exactly what Rites of Reanimation does on the Technomancer. Finally, I thought we'd just mention these new Cryptek Arcana rules that are coming in, that we still don't really know all that much about. But basically this is a small table where you can add some fancy toys to your Crypteks. We've got a full list of all of their fancy names that I'm not going to bother going into too much at the moment, because we don't know what any of them do. It is going to be fun to have more interesting ways to personalise them, as well as just things like the traditional relics. The only one that we do know about are these Countemporal Nanomines on the Chronomancer model. We now know that these will cost you 30 points, and you nominate 1 enemy unit to slow until the start of your next command phase, and your half is advanced rolls and charge rolls. For me, I'm honestly not sure this is worth it at 30 points on top of whatever the Chronomancer costs already. It's potentially useful, but being 18 inches away from said unit means that you have to be very close indeed. It could just give you the risk of your Chronomancer being shot to death. On top of that, I think it's just a bit situational. A lot of armies do have powerful close combat units that this will be useful on, but quite a few don't, and you could just be paying 30 points down the drain against armies with lots of multiple small units, or just armies that want to shoot you to death rather than try and charge you. It's going to be fun to pick through the list though. I'm sure there'll be some interesting and powerful options when we've seen all the options. So let me know what you think of the Necron Stratagems down in the comments, particularly if there's any interesting combos or synergies that you've seen with them, or ones that you think could be handy for the Necron force. I will of course be fully reviewing the Necron Codex when we have the rules out, and hopefully doing a few more focused unit reviews over the next few weeks, so feel free to subscribe to the Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see any of that. If you are enjoying the channel and you're thinking about buying any Warhammer models in the near future, then I'd just like to mention one way that you can help support the channel. In the video description I have a link to Element Games, which is a UK based discount retailer giving you 10 to 20% off Warhammer miniatures. If you click through that link before ordering in any models, a small amount goes to help support the channel without costing you any more whatsoever. It can just be a good way to help keep these videos coming without costing you any more on miniatures that you were already going to buy. I do have a very similar link for Amazon in the USA and Canada. Again, that pretty much works the same way. If you click on it, then any sale on Amazon will give a small amount to Auspex Tactics, again not costing you any more whatsoever, and that can be anything from Warhammer to basically anything else that you can buy off there. Again, just one way that you can help support if you'd like to. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.